I was in Canada quite a few years ago, and I read an article in a Canadian paper, I think it might have been the Globe and Mail, and it was about a village in Spain that was depopulated and had all the marks of depopulation. It talked about the lack of children, about men leaving, men falling victim to poor health. And I was very interested in this, how this village survived, because it talked about the whole region. This was northern Spain. And I began to read and do some research, just online research, and I found out that dying villages were a feature throughout Europe. So I applied for a grant and my grant line was to respond in poetry and prose to the phenomenon of dying villages in Europe. And I visited northern Spain, I visited central France, I visited Italy, I visited Germany, Bulgaria, and Russia. I may have missed out one or two places, but I found out the pattern broadly is the same, and the pattern is the same as in Tottery, as I've been discovering in the last couple of days doing field work here. Once the school closes, that's the first sort of tragic thing that can happen to a village, because then, families don't want to move there. The school closes, the shop closes, the transport system doesn't work so well, the post office closes. When I was in Russia, I met a priest, an Orthodox priest, who was building churches. He was knocking down where the Soviet Union had built, communist blocks in villages. He was knocking these down. He was getting money from wherever he could, and he was using ex-prison labor. And he was building these beautiful churches, very ornate churches. And I said to him, Father, I said, why are you building these churches in places that have so few inhabitants? And he said, people need a place to come. He said, if people have a new outfit, they want to show off, they can do that in the church. We used to do it in the shop, but the shop's gone. And he said a number of people would say to him, women would say to him, Father, if you built a church here, I could be buried here. If you built a church here, my daughter could be married here. And so the village still had this life. He was a great man, Father Georgi. And he was one of the great spirits that I met when I was researching the village and the road. And people would say to me, don't you find it depressing, the dying, going into all these dying villages? But I found the most amazingly spirited people there. I mean, here we met wonderfully active people who are still living very full and rich lives. They may have a concern about what's going to happen in a few years' time, but and one of them in fact said that it's 26 years since somebody hung up a diaper on the line to dry. 26 years since a baby was born. But they live, as I say, very full, rich lives. And it's great for me, because the two men that I met yesterday were 71 and 72, and they're regarded as the young men. Well, I'm 73, so that makes me feel young too. And just to say, when I went off on these village trips. Once in Russia, I traveled with an interpreter. I had to. It was the language I didn't know anything about. And the interpreter, Masha, said for her, it was an adventure. She didn't know anything about these dying villages, the number of them, the sheer number of them. And I went there and I interviewed people, through the interpreter. And I took photographs, I recorded sounds, I tried to capture everything that I could about the village. And I obviously wrote a lot. And when I got back, I created a website, a book of photographs, but I also wrote a travel book, In Another World, amongst Europe's dying villages. And that was really the core of the work that I did. But then I started doing other things, and I started working with musicians. And Wendy, the harp player, asked me if I had anything that the Galloway Agreement could use musically. And I was always interested in exploring further the idea of the village and the road. And so, remarkably quickly, actually, I put some things together, wrote some new things, and gave them the material. And so it welded together into the show of the village and the road, and they were very sympathetic to the material that's in the show. And we always feel when we're performing it that we're creating a world. I say a lovely thing. Yesterday I met an old farmer, and he was very proudly showing me his rice field. He said, this is the prize-winning rice, sweet and lovely. And I said to him, does he ever think about, what's to happen to his once he dies, and what the future holds? And he said, a man is a man who can pass on a good rice field. So I thought that was a lovely thing to say. We can lives are we find meaning in lives where we can, and it's always a pleasure and to be able to talk to people about their lives. And that's really what the village and the road is about. And it's an honor and a privilege to have been invited here to do that.